last week I kind of got into it over this idea of alignment and there being one right alignment. And that conversation carried over into my weekly teachers class. And we really made a connection in hearing everybody talk between this idea of right alignment and some of the reasons why yoga classes can get abusive and not be so trauma sensitive. And we talked about ways of addressing these things in our teaching. And I'm bringing it up because if that's something that seems interesting to you, I want to invite you to join us. It's my weekly teachers class. And if you've been thinking about joining, I want to mention that we've had this introductory rate that's going to expire at the end of this month. The price is going to go up just a little bit starting November 1st. It's still priced incredibly low, but we are going to be raising it just a little bit. So if you want to lock in the introductory rate, you'd need to join before the end of the month. It's the J. Brown Yoga Teachers Class. You can find it at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, how is it that a week has gone by? Is that possible? Well, it is because it has. And here we are again. This is J. Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How is everybody? Oh, man. It's Friday night. Looks like they're going to vote in the Senate tomorrow to confirm Supreme Court nominee. I was talking about this last week. And honestly, I don't even know what to say. Whole thing feels shitty to me. And it fills me with like a lot of fear. But I can't even do it justice right now. I got to be frank. I don't have the energy in me in this moment to really tackle that issue because I'm a little bit spent, frankly. I'm coming to you once again from the attic here in Easton, Pennsylvania. My attic, that is, because I'm on like some solo daddy duty tonight. It's not too bad. It's just one out of two of my daughters. My wife and my eldest daughter, they went to Brooklyn for the night. They've got something they're doing tomorrow. They're going to a museum. They've got some thing planned, mom and daughter thing. So I'm here with my youngest. She's 4, Annabelle, and she is downstairs sleeping. I just got her down, and I'm up here in the attic. So there is a vague possibility that a small child will start screaming while I'm doing this, at which point I will have to stop immediately and go down and tend to her. Mom is usually the one who puts her down most nights, and sometimes she still gets up in the middle of the night. So keep your fingers crossed that if she gets up and I go in there, it's all going to be cool. I think it will be. I think it'll be fine. But in any case, I had to do the whole night routine. Those of you got kids, you know. So I'm kind of spent. I don't feel up to tackling the really difficult issues in this intro tonight. I hope that's okay. We tackle some pretty serious issues in today's episode with Carrie Owerko. But before I tell you about that, I do have one thing I feel like I need to say because I got some pushback over my blog post this month. I don't know if you guys read it, but I got some very specific criticism from teachers who are of younger generation than me. And basically what they were saying is that when I talk about Instagram yoga on the podcast, or when I talk about the younger generation not having access to the same kind of stuff, or I'm sort of like this old geezer talking about when I was a kid, or whatever like that. They basically said that I am being elitist and I am talking down to them. And you know what? I really did think about it, and I could see why it would feel like that to a lot of those teachers. And in truth, that is not my intent. I am not intending to cast any aspersions on the younger generations of teachers. They're just doing what they've been handed. That's the deal they've been handed. Like a lot of these teacher training programs, they instruct them and they give them segments in how to get their Instagram feeds going, like the marketing, the social media marketing workshop in the teacher training. Like that's what's been successful for some people in the industry, and that became kind of a model that people are trying to emulate, So I don't really blame the teachers. It's really the overarching trend that I get dismayed by. But even still, I think I could be a little bit better about it. And for anybody who's listening, who's from the younger generation, who's felt slighted, I want to apologize to you. I want there to be solidarity among yoga teachers. And I also really feel like I don't want to create adversarial relationships. I have this strong viewpoint, this way that I see things, and I express it in these talks with the people who come on. But I don't mean that to be some kind of dogma or to assert that as the right answer. I could totally be wrong, and I very often am, and I will freely admit it when I am. But I want to be able to connect in the ways that are possible with people who see things different than me. I think that's part of the problem right now, not just in the yoga world, but in the country where we're in these little bubbles, where I've spoken about this expression that my friend Douglas Rushkoff points to from Timothy Leary, where they say, find the others. Well, Douglas was talking about this on his podcast this week, that find the others might not mean finding people who are just like you, but might mean finding people who are different than you, So I am going to continue to have and express my views and to challenge people when I disagree with them. And I encourage people to do the same back towards me. And that includes you, all the millennials and younger generation teachers out there who might be listening to this. Totally hold my feet to the fire, We got to stick together, We got to find more shared humanity right now on all levels. So, for whatever that's worth. Now, let's get to today's podcast with Carrie Owerko. And let me just say, this was initially going to just be kind of a follow-up talk to my talk with Lauren last week on YIP.guru. But, there were some developments that happened in the Iyengar Yoga community. And maybe some of you know about this, maybe some of you don't. They weren't entirely new things because they'd been written about many years ago, but there was a new article that was put out that was very forcefully putting forth clear accounts of sexual assaults by a very senior Iyengar teacher named Manuso Manos, I think. Is that his name? I think that's his name, Manos. And he's this very senior Iyengar teacher. And at the time that I was speaking with Carrie, the article had just come out. And so I brought it up and we spoke about it. And Carrie is very honest. I really appreciated it. We have a really candid and real talk that you're going to get to hear today. But there's stuff that's happened since then. there was an ethics committee process, and they put out a statement, which a lot of people are not satisfied with. But none of that had happened yet when I talked with Carrie. So just to know that before those of you who are up to date on that start sending emails and writing comments for us not addressing it fully, just know, like, we didn't know everything that's happened so far, and it was in the midst of it. This was recorded a couple of weeks ago. So just know that. But we do tackle some really serious and important issues. So it's a good talk, and I'm glad that you're going to get to hear it today. Before we do, let me mention that today's podcast is sponsored by yogalifestyle.com, home of the Becca Long Life mats. These mats were my studio mat for 10 years because of their grippiness and their durability. I'm very happy to recommend them and the other great products that owner Ray Greenberg is sharing with the yoga community. And you know what? I'm not the only one who loves these mats. I've been talking about the Iyengar community. Well, they've embraced the Becca mats for decades, and it's actually like the official mat of the 2019 Iyengar convention in Dallas. Ray's going to be at that convention with his mats and his unique Pune yoga chair with the cotton-wrapped back. He will also have his hand-woven cotton blankets and Gita bloomers. Of course, you don't have to wait for the Dallas convention. All these things and more can be found at yogalifestyle.com, where retail and wholesale inquiries are always welcome. Go to yogalifestyle.com. This episode of Yoga Talks is also sponsored by our oldest and dearest friend, Karmasoft. If you're not familiar with Karmasoft, it is a complete online yoga studio management solution. I'm sure a lot of you out there are on Mind Body Online, and maybe you're not happy with it. Well, in my opinion, Karmasoft is way better. And I know some people out there get upset when I say that, but it is the truth. And I know that from firsthand experience. I've been talking about Karmasoft since long before they were a sponsor. In fact, you can go back to the episode from October 2017 that I recorded with the owner of Karmasoft, Rudy Senecal. You can hear all about the company and my experience with it. If you or anyone you know is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, the work of doing the scheduling and the class payments and the accounting can all be made far easier and more efficient by using Karmasoft. I highly recommend it. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. Okay, let me also just drop my stuff real quick. I'm going to be in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, October 12th through 14th at the Yoga Loft. I'm going to be in East Hartford, Connecticut on October 20th at Sacred Rivers. And I'm going to be in Fishkill, New York at Namastesis, November 3rd. Let me also mention I'm going to be in New Zealand and Australia in November and December. And they're basically all sold out, and people have been kind of emailing about it. But I just got word that there are a few spaces left. There's some spaces left in Auckland, New Zealand, November 24th and 25th. All of my Australian friends who are bummed out because they're on the wait list and not sure going to get in, we've already booked a 2019 tour, so I'm coming back just so you know. You can find out about all those gigs and more, and all my other stuff, blog, podcast, online video offerings, all that stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, that's it. I will touch base with you on the other side, let you know who's coming on next week. But for now, let's just go ahead and get to this. Let's listen to this talk that I had with Carrie Owerko.
Jay?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Carrie. How are you?
Good. I'm just going to shut the window here so I can hear your voice a little better.
Okay.
I'm in Zurich, Switzerland, and I just got back from a swim in the lake, so I think there's some water in my ears.
Okay. You're in Zurich. That's cool. Have you been to Zurich before?
Yeah, a couple times before, and it's just amazing, especially in the summertime or early fall, and this year's been super warm in Europe. So, yeah, it's incredible. It's hot, sunny, perfect weather.
Are you working? Is there like a teaching gig there? Or are you just like hanging out?
Yeah, I'm on a tour right now. So I've been in Europe since the end of August and taught in Copenhagen and then in Stuttgart, Germany, in Warsaw, Poland. Now I'm here. And then next week it's Italy and then finally Paris.
Wow. Got a nice tour you're on the road, man.
Totally.
Some people don't know, it's like, I remember when I was like, I had a yoga center in Brooklyn for 10 years. So I was sort of bunkered down.
Yeah.
And before I got into yoga, though, I was like a starving musician, and we like toured a little, So being a yoga teacher sometimes is kind of like that. You're on the road, It's like hotels and flights, and you're traveling.
Yeah, luckily, when I started really doing this more vigorously, I guess you could say, Airbnb was on the scene, and so I stay in apartments. Not like the Airbnbs that someone rents you a room, but I have the whole place to myself.
Uh-huh.
So I can cook for myself, and I have lots of room to practice, and it makes, I think, a huge difference. I cannot stand hotels. Unless it's something really nice that I can't afford. I just really love to, things like cooking for myself, things like that are just really important. And having, and then you get to pick your place. So I always pick places that seem nicer than my apartment in New York.
Well, no, I get it though. I mean, I sold the center a year ago, so I've been traveling a lot this last year. My kids are older. My wife kind of like gave me the go ahead, so I've been traveling a lot more. And I found you're right, like being able to maintain some of my own rituals as much as possible. Important. It's like to keep your head together when you're like transversing time zones and stuff.
Yeah, it's the ritual, how you structure your day. It's really important, even though there's, one of the upsides of travel, obviously, is the novel experiences and how you are just, it is just an exercise in neuroplasticity, because you really are exposed to things that you wouldn't normally be exposed to. But then the rituals become even more important. And I get it with the time zones. Like, that's why if I come over to Europe or if I go to the Asia Pacific, to Australia, I will be there for a while. I just totally can't do the back and forth thing, just like that would be too much.
I know.
So it's difficult that first week, there's jet lag, and then I've adjusted and, can fall into a groove of getting to bed early and getting up early because that's,
and you spend all your time in the practice room,
yeah,
doing yoga stuff. Yeah, so I really appreciate you taking some time out of your tour to talk to me. I think I mentioned in an email to you, there was like a couple of convergences that prompted me to reach out to you. I recorded a talk with Lauren Fishman, which we'll post before this one, which was awesome. Okay. He's such a great guy. It was super fun to talk to him. He's great. But there was like a couple of things that came up. Like, we had some debate about YIP.guru, some things on there. Totally fun, good debate. But then we have a mutual friend. She's in like my teacher's class, and she was talking about a practice that she had with you. And she mentioned your name, and then I saw your name connected to YIP.guru some. But what was interesting to me is like the kind of debate I had with Lauren is he had a pretty like old school Iyengar viewpoint about alignment. And that was sort of the area that we were discussing. But when I was talking to our friend Jennifer, and she was talking about your class, and then I looked at your bio and I saw Laban and Bartinieff and all this other stuff, I thought, wow, that's a really interesting kind of mix. And sometimes, some ways in my mind, almost like those two things don't go together. So I'm curious to talk to you about. That's all just for you to have a little bit of background of where I'm coming from today. And
totally.
I have a really great friend named Amy Matthews who
I know Amy.
She came on the podcast and she told us all about Laban movement. She told us all about Bartinia fundamentals and like schooled me on all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I've had like a little bit of experience in that kind of somatic movement world.
Yeah.
But that feels like, to me, very different than the experience I had studying at the Iyengar Institute. Now, granted, I haven't studied at the Iyengar Institute in many, many years. It could have changed.
When were you there?
A lot of years ago. Maybe
was
even
it when we were
7 to 10 years ago.
24th Street or 22nd? Was it like the first space? Do you remember?
It was the first space because I moved out of Manhattan and I haven't been to that center in a long time. So it's been a long time because I moved in different directions and got inspired by Desikachar and like went in other directions.
Yeah.
But honestly, for me, like I found at that time when I was there, and it was a long time ago, like there was nobody like cueing me to like have interoception, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was very particular prop setups and microtonal alignment, like Kevin Gardner, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious. So you had this background in dance first, right? Was that before you got to yoga?
Yeah, it was, I studied dance and theater, musical theater, in college in Denver. I grew up in New Mexico, and I studied theater and dance there in Denver, and then I joined a company in New England. I really wanted to come to New York because in college we took the theater trip to New York, and I just thought it was amazing, and I remember going, like, I think we were heading to Newark or something, flew out of Newark, and I looked back at the skyline, and the World Trade Centers were there then too, and I just had that feeling, like, even though it was kind of overwhelming for me because I was a small town girl, I grew up in a rural area of New Mexico, and Denver, was like the big city, and I just looked back at that skyline, and I just had such a feeling of familiarity, and like I would be there, and I knew it would take time, and I just felt like, those things when you just can't describe it, but you just have a moment of like knowing, and
yes, I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, a place of knowing, and when decisions come from there, and you can't really explain why, but you just know it.
It's just felt, I remember the color of the sky. It was in the evening, and it was just, it's just a feeling. And so, I joined this company in New England. They were based out of Boston, and I lived in this, the director and his wife, like in their upstairs flat in this brownstone in the south end of Boston. And I did theater there and dance there and experimental theater. I really got into the experimental scene, little that there was in Boston. And that was kind of like my transition to try to come to New York, because the East Coast was so different culturally. When you grow up in a rural area, people are happy to see other people, and like like if you're driving by on the main street in my town, if you're driving one direction and someone else is driving the other direction, you always look, you'd probably wave, like you don't know them,
honk,
but you
honk,
wave.
hi.
Yeah, and my husband, like when he first went to New Mexico, he's like, it's so weird. Like people are always looking at you, and they like, you walk into, the little diner, and he's like, everybody's head looks, and it was just so weird for him. But that was what I knew. And so when I moved to Boston, I just thought people were so cold and unfriendly, and, like they just didn't look at you. They never like eye contact and stuff like that. And it just took a while. I knew I wanted to go to New York, but I knew that I just had this feeling I got to go there in stages. And so I was in Boston for a couple of years, and then I came to the city, and I studied at the neighborhood playhouse. You were in theater, weren't you, Jay?
I was. I mean, first thing I would say is I think that thing of people not looking at you is a sort of big city thing where when there's so many people crammed into such a small space, there's kind of like this need to try to claim anonymity, even when you're like smashed up against somebody in a subway.
And the funny thing about that is, having grown up in a small town, all I ever wanted was to live in a city. I mean, my parents were from Chicago, and we would go there in the summertime, and I loved the city, and I loved the anonymity piece. Like, that was so intriguing to me, because when you're in a small town, everybody knows everything. Like, every experience that you have, you think, that was just something that happened, between you and someone else. And then all of a sudden you go to school the next day and like everybody knows. And it was really, I just want to go somewhere where, I don't know anyone and nobody knows me. But at the same time, when I did go to the East Coast, and I just was so kind of, it was just such it was such a change that people were head down, like moving somewhere from point A to point B, and they weren't really looking around unless you were a tourist or something, like I was.
The only time I've really seen that, I saw that break after 9/11. Yes. I had like experiences on subway platforms with strangers after that. You know what I'm saying? There was like, for a brief period of time, I don't think it lasted, I don't know how long it lasted, but it's not that way so much now. But there was a period of time where that like broke down and people like were right there with each other. It was intense.
I remember that. And I really felt that was a special time. So I came to New York, and I did. I studied at the neighborhood playhouse, and then I joined the Irondale Ensemble. I don't know if you know.
I know a little bit about it. I went to NYU from LA for theater. And first I studied like Stanislavski and went to Playwrights Horizons, and then I switched to the experimental theater wing.
Yeah.
And so I sort of was in that world for a little while and kind of was doing like this performance art thing before I left it. So I kind of know the world, and New York was like the place to go for that.
Wasn't it though?
There was like a lot of opportunities, just like for yoga too. Like I've been talking about it, like from like 92 to like 99, like Manhattan was like just a hotbed of stuff happening, And in
the 80s too. I don't know if you were there in the 80s.
No, that's before my time. I didn't get here till 1990. When did you land in the town?
85. And it was great. All the little theaters, the dance companies that I was performing all the time, because everybody was doing something. Mm-hmm. And you just some little black box somewhere,
and you could live there. I had an apartment for $450 for like 10 years. You know what I mean? It was like you could live there as an artist, and you didn't need to make that much money. You could make stuff.
It was. I miss that. I see that in Europe. One of the things I love about being here is it's changing too.
Mm-hmm.
But you see that there's still some of that more than there is, I think, certainly in New York. I think maybe it's different in Philly, or, maybe in Chicago. I don't know. But, so I did that, and Irondale was amazing. We had a great choreographer.
What kind of work did you do? What kind of like dance was your thing, or what kind of work were you making?
Well, Irondale was experimental theater. It's movement theater. It was a great experience, based out of story theater. Like, do you know the work of Viola Spolin?
I do.
Right?
Yeah.
That that's the, ground of, say, Saturday Night Live. People don't know, like Second City was really born out of this improvisational theater, story theater games. I did a lot of movement improv as well. And I loved the improvisation. I mean, I think there are values that I learned in that work that that are just deep tenets in my practice and in my teaching and in my life to this day. I mean, I just think that improvisational theater, the work of Viola Spolin, which wasn't initially, she was working with immigrants in Chicago, to try to help them assimilate. So it was born out of a need to help people communicate and to break down these inhibitions, and it's brilliant. And it was just so Irondale created pieces. It was avant-garde. It was we often had a little bit of a political bent to things. We did a lot of Brecht. We made up our own. We made up our own shows. Like we had the Uncle Vanya show, so it was our take on Chekhov. And we made a piece about Abby Hoffman, and that was called and it was like a mixture of the story of Abby Hoffman and then Peter Pan, and so and Annie B. Parsons was the choreographer at the time, and she's gone on to do amazing things.
I was in her show. She directed some things at NYU when I was there, and I was in her pieces. I met her. She was great.
So she's one of the founding, she and her husband Paul Lazar, and
yes.
The days that I was in Irondale, they were just really special people, and I am so grateful.
And they had a real community there. I remember they were working together for years and years and taking care of each other and stuff, if I recall.
Yeah, no, we this is how we lived. We made our money doing this, and we toured, and we would go to this kids camp at the end of August every year. That was after the kids had left up in Maine, and for 2 weeks we would workshop things, and we would play together, not just our theater games and our movement experiments, but we would play volleyball and we would play tennis, and we would, there was something, it was just something really powerful in that. And, such interesting people in the company, really. They were, and they're still, they have a building in Brooklyn now, Terry Grease and Jim Neeson, and there's, I think, 4 people, maybe 3 that were still, they're still in the company. They have this building in Brooklyn, and they do their work. And we did a lot of work in the schools, and we did work at Rikers Island. I was out at Rikers for a couple of years. It was great. And really, Irondale is, strangely enough, the reason I went to the Laban Institute to study movement analysis. It's the reason that I did yoga, because I went to a play with Jim Neeson. He was one of our directors, and it was, I don't know if you remember Ariane Munchkin. I'm going to mispronounce her name, but it's the Théâtre des Soleils from France.
Yes, I
Do you remember
know who you're talking about.
Their productions at BAM, of the Greek tragedies, like the Oresteia, and it would go over several nights, and and they had the dirt pit, you know what I mean, and the Greek chorus was these Katkali dancers, her company, but they learned this dance, and it was really movement theater at its best, and
it was super high art. It wasn't low black box theater. It was big and awesome.
Yeah, and that was, I was so intrigued by that, and so Jim bought me this book on Indian theater, and that got me all intrigued with India. I was I'm gonna go. And we were also doing Jerzy Krutowski stuff. So I was very curious, and he had his actors doing a sort of yoga.
Right.
So I sort of went shopping around New York.
It was often offered as kind of a movement component. That's how I first got exposed to it in acting training. But later on, when I acting went sour for me, or trying to make a living, I didn't have a community like that. So trying to just go out there and be an actor kind of went south. And yoga ended up being the thing that I landed on, because I needed to move, Yeah. And there's something, that I think that what you hit on, an idea of community is really, it is so powerful. And, that was, even if the community has problems, I think as human beings, we are social animals. We need each other. And even that, that can be a detriment at times, because I think a lot of potential abuse comes out of the fact that we'd rather belong than not belong. Do you know what I mean? And yes.
And so, yoga practice for me, I went to Jivamukti, I did.
Was that Second Avenue? Was it Second Avenue when you went? Yeah. Me too.
It was really, and they were the ones that told me to go to Iyengar because I'd be like asking questions,
Yeah. If you had a lot of questions about form, they sent you there. That's what they did to me too. Like they're like, if you want to learn form, you go to the Iyengar Center and you go study there. Yeah.
And that was, I studied Laban, like that came Bob Bartenieff out of Irondale too. I was just so intrigued with the whole movement. Exploration has really always been at the core of, even as a kid, I was a mover. I am a kinesthetic learner. I just absolutely dig it, and so, so my director at Irondale was like, yeah, you should check this out. He bought me a little book on Laban Bartenieff. It was like actually on the movement scales. It was more Laban, but I was just intrigued by that. And then when I was at the Laban Institute, I started my own yoga practice kind of out of just these different things I was learning. And it was, patched together but it was time. It was just different. It was just my time for me. Do you know what I mean? To tune in and
you're talking about you just had like a self practice that you were doing.
Yeah. That I sort of made up.
No, I understand. I did the same thing. You're just practicing by yourself at home. And I had a teacher, this guy I met in India, who kind of made me feel like it would be okay to do whatever I wanted. Because because sometimes the schools felt like they had a lot of rules you're supposed to follow, a lot of stuff you're supposed to learn. Didn't necessarily feel like you could just explore and do whatever you want.
Yeah, and when I went to the Iyengar Institute after I was, kind of directed that way, I thought, I should really learn this thing that was really gave me so much joy. Like from day one, like when I started yoga, I really wanted a practice. I was like, I want to practice. Like I want to have something I do every day, because I was used to that from dance training and from, sports before that when I was a kid. And I just loved the discipline of like a daily practice. So, I went to the Iyengar Institute, and at first it was, I went to one of those classes that was, because I'd been doing yoga and I was like able to do things, and I didn't go to a beginning level class. Bad me.
I know you didn't start in level 1. Did you get scolded?
You know what? This teacher was compassionate in that they thought she'll figure out that she doesn't belong.
And if you had ability, then they might have allowed you.
Right? I was just tripped up with those freaking belts. Like I was like,
you have to know how to do it right. You have to. There's a way to do it right.
The belt, and he's using 6 of them. It was. I just felt my, And then, thankfully, by the end of the class, I just knew. Look, this was intriguing. It was intriguing, and I wasn't yelled at, fortunately. And so I came back and I did level 1s, and I.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.